Despite being part of Final Fantasy IX's ensemble cast, Vivi Ornitier was written in such a way by the team that he was often projected much higher within the narrative of the game than many of his contemporaries like Steiner, Freya and Aiko. That's not to detract from those other characters though. They do still have prominent moments of character development and they do have involvement in the wider story of Final Fantasy IX. I think it's just safe to say though that with Vivi, he's very much positioned as the tritagonist of the game, sitting behind Zidane and Garland in terms of importance to the overall narrative. Part of this is due to his unique view of the world, and it's because of this that Vivi's influence on the party is rather pronounced. As they venture from place to place and uncover new twists in a developing plot, we get to see Vivi progress through a vast array of emotions within a short period of time as he learns and adapts to everything that happens around him on what turns out to be a rather whirlwind adventure. How the party also adapts to Vivi developing in this way is also rather intriguing. And to me, that's what makes Vivi such an appealing character. He has such an innocent demeanour, and as we see him develop throughout his journey, it's difficult not to become emotionally invested in him. That would explain, therefore, why we have been absolutely inundated with requests to cover Vivi as a character within our Origins series, especially since we posted up the video covering Final Fantasy IX's main protagonist, Zidane. It's been amazing to see how passionate you all are about Vivi as a character, but also the wider cast of Final Fantasy IX. It just goes to show how close people hold that game to their hearts, and I really hope that I can do Vivi proud. Before we dive into Vivi's origins though, I just want to remind everyone that even if you are already subscribed to Final Fantasy Union, make sure you hit that notification button so that you get notified when we publish new content. Also, make sure you let us know in the comments who you'd like us to see cover in a future Origins video. Alright, let's get started with Vivi's origins. Vivi was born during July of 1799, but his entry into the world was unfortunately part of a much wider, nefarious scheme that was being concocted by Queen Brahne of Alexandria and Kuja. After being seduced by Kuja, Brahne became obsessed with power and dominion. She therefore set her sights on conquering the other nations that resided on the Mist Continent, and to help her accomplish this, she turned to Kuja, her new weapon supplier. Keen to escalate conflict wherever possible across Gaia, Kuja taught Brahne how to harness the power of the mist to manufacture Black Mages, dispensable, soulless entities with incredible magical power that would obey their master's orders. This led to the creation of a secret underground facility at the village of Dolly, where Black Mages were produced to become part of the Alexandrian armed forces and to essentially act as grunt soldiers. This facility was used to create a variety of different Black Mages, with Type A, Type B and Type C being the most prominent, and as time passed, they began to experiment as they looked to create new, more powerful Black Mages that would have enhanced aptitude with magic and would also have stronger cognitive abilities. This saw the creation of the Black Waltzes, advanced Black Mages that weren't mass produced and who, once given a task, were able to think for themselves about how they would go about completing it. It also saw the creation of Vivi, a prototype Black Mage that would have extreme power, especially when compared to the regular Black Mages. This prototype would also be much more intelligent and would look rather different from anything else that had been created at the Dolly Village. After the creation of Vivi, he was to be transported from Dolly to Alexandria along with a shipment of conventional Black Mages. However, while en route, Vivi fell out of the cargo ship and landed in a forest near Trino. Having only been alive for what was essentially a limited amount of time, Vivi had next to no experience of, well, anything, and it meant that he ended up wandering around aimlessly for approximately 2 months. That was until he was fortunately found by Quan, who took Vivi in, hoping that he would grow and become a good source of food for him in the future. But after 6 months had passed, Vivi had only developed in a mental capacity. His physical attributes weren't anything different from when Quan found him, and this was rather disappointing for him. Still, despite Quan's ulterior motives for looking after Vivi, the pair did end up becoming somewhat close. Quan was even the one who named him Vivi, and in return, Vivi affectionately called him Grandpa. Soon after though, Quan passed away, leaving Vivi all alone in the world again. This time, however, Vivi was much less helpless and he ended up venturing to Trino by himself. It would be a decision that would see him embark on a magical journey of personal growth, but also one of wonderment and friendship. While in the city, Vivi managed to board an airship to Alexandria, having purchased a ticket to see the famed Lord Avon play I Want to Be Your Canary. He was excited by these new experiences, but upon arriving in this majestic new city, Vivi was left with disappointment. The ticket he'd purchased was counterfeit, and the journey had essentially been for nothing. Dejected, Vivi was left to wander around the streets of Alexandria, unsure of what to do next. But as luck would have it, he ran into Prince Puck from Burmah Seer, who was running around under the name of Rat Kid. Unlike their previous encounter, this time Puck was much less aggressive and he offered to help Vivi, albeit for a price. He would need to become Puck's slave. Showing his innocence and naivety, Vivi agreed without any real protest and went along with what was in reality just a silly game Puck was playing. He wanted to watch the play too, and he needed Vivi's help to see it, but he couldn't just ask for it. They worked together to get inside the castle, and once they were inside, they were able to settle down, relax, and watch the play. Well, until they were found by the castle guards. In the panic that ensued afterwards, Vivi ended up on the stage of the play, and before he could do anything about it, he had become wrapped up in a much larger plot. The kidnapping of Princess Garnet by Zidane Tribal and the Tantalus Theatre Group. What happened next got even more crazy. Vivi not only revealed that Princess Cornelia in the play was Garnet, but when the Prima Vista crash-landed after their daring escape, he became separated alongside the princess. She then proceeded to be taken prisoner by a prison cage, and Vivi became petrified with fear, only able to watch as Zidane and Steiner attempted to free her in vain. After the fight, Vivi was left distraught. This scenario was just not something he was even remotely prepared for. Venturing to Alexandria to watch a play, he had been hoping to enjoy happier times following the death of his grandpa. Instead, he was roped into a botched kidnapping that had left him stranded yet again in an unwelcoming forest. He ended up confessing to Zidane and Steiner that he felt personally responsible for whatever fate may befall Garnet, as he had been struck down by fear and was unable to use his magical powers. Despite then fighting back against another prison cage that had attempted to capture Vivi, what had happened to Garnet weighed heavy on Vivi, and when they returned to the safety of the Prima Vista, he continued to lament his inaction, becoming more worried about the well-being of the princess. Both Zidane and Steiner recognized his abilities though, and despite the negative outlook that had befallen Vivi due to the unfortunate sequence of events that really dated back to the death of Quan, they were determined to actively try and boost up his confidence, if only because they knew it would increase their odds of success in the battles that were sure to follow. They therefore asked for his help, and although Vivi initially refused, following their persistence, Vivi did accept, albeit somewhat reluctantly, as he still wasn't sure if he would actually be any help. It was a decision that would have a significant impact on the rest of Vivi's life, but with no ties to hold him down, it was the only decision that he could really make. The path ahead though would not be easy, and Vivi would encounter hardships as he would begin to learn more about his unconventional past. His first experience of this would take place as the party ventured into the Dolly Village. Almost as soon as they entered the village, the innkeeper recognized Vivi as one of the missing Black Mage prototypes, and due to pressures he had been facing from his brother, he felt compelled to inform people within the town of Vivi's appearance. Vivi also had the unfortunate experience of children running away from him as they knew exactly what he was. Not too long after, Vivi was then taken by the villagers. They were puzzled as to how and why he was moving and talking, and decided to add him to the next shipment that was bound for Alexandria Castle. This was a rather scary ordeal for Vivi. He had almost no idea what was going on, and he was so intimidated that when in danger, he chose not to fight back, just doing what he was told and ending up in a box ready for shipment. It served as a reminder that even with his incredible powers, Vivi was ultimately still very much a naive child. He could have easily fought back against the villagers, and he could easily have escaped from the box whenever he wanted, but he couldn't. He had a mental block, and it was therefore rather fortunate that Zidane and Garnet were able to come to his rescue. And after making sure that he was safe, Zidane again tried to bolster Vivi's confidence, telling him to surprise his attackers and empower himself. Vivi then decided to join Zidane and Garland as they chose to investigate the Dolly Village facility further. He knew it was dangerous, but he felt safe with his allies by his side, and he wanted to learn more about what was going on. But there was no way he could have possibly been prepared for what they would find out about the true nature of the facility, that it was a production line for Black Mages. This revelation shook Vivi to his very core. He was stunned. It made him question everything he knew. Why did they look like him, and why were they being produced? Was he produced in the same way? Is that where he came from too? Vivi was already in a very fragile state due to everything that had been happening in such a short space of time, but this tipped him over the edge. Vivi's previous demeanour wasn't exactly upbeat, but now he was distraught, and it affected the whole group. Garnet just didn't know what to say, especially as her mother could be the one that was responsible, but Zidane vowed to stay by the little Black Mage's side. When they were then aboard an airship that Zidane planned to use in order to get to Lindblum, Vivi encountered some of the Black Mage dolls from before, but this time they were alive and moving around. But when he attempted to interact with them, none of them responded. That was until Vivi was attacked by Black Waltz number 3. Following threats against Vivi, the Black Mages on the airship rallied around him, attempting to protect him from the powerful enemy that stood before them. But they were no match for Black Waltz number 3, and Vivi could only watch in horror as the Black Mages were slaughtered. When the fighting stopped, Vivi had finally had enough. He had been too scared to act when Garnet was captured, and he had been too scared to act when he was kidnapped. But this time he was ready. The shackles were off, and Black Waltz number 3 was about to receive the full taste of just what this powerful little Black Mage could do. Running out from the ruined bridge area, Vivi screamed. This rush of emotion allowed him to enter into a trance state, and Black Waltz 3 was forced to retreat, but only for a moment as the two would square off yet again. Again, Vivi was successfully able to thwart the Black Waltz's advances, but all this exertion took its toll, and Vivi collapsed. After passing through the south gate, the group then had a chance to catch their breath, but Vivi's mind was still stuck on the similarities that existed between him and the Black Mages. He asked Zidane to comment, if only to receive some kind of affirmation around what he was thinking and feeling, but it was Steiner who stepped in, stating that there was no reason to think that they would be the same, but even if they were, why would it matter? It helped Vivi to feel better about himself, as Steiner was right. He was different. He was an individual with his own thoughts and feelings. But these thoughts continued to play on Vivi's mind, and when they learnt that Burmah Seer had been invaded by an unknown force that contained soldiers with steeple-crowned hats, he volunteered to go with Freya and Zidane to not only help provide assistance, but also to find out more about these elusive foes. Upon arriving in Burmah Seer, they found the kingdom in absolute chaos. Its forces had been routed, and many of its citizens had either escaped or been slain. As they closed in on the royal palace and the answer as to who was behind this devastating attack, Freya attempted to dissuade Vivi from continuing on this same path. She was worried that even though he had good intentions, that the answers to his questions may turn out to be rather harmful. Vivi though showed a newfound conviction. He was desperate to find out who he was, where he came from, and whether he was even human. Sadly though, they learnt very little about the origins of the Black Mages, but after finding out about a connection between the Black Mages and Kuja, Vivi agreed to stick with the group as they planned to venture to Clara, the next target of the Black Mage army. Again though, they learnt very little, but when the group returned to Lindblum, they uncovered new details from Regent Sid relating to the relationship between Kuja, Queen Brahne, and the Black Mages. Armed with this new information, it was decided that the group would head to the outer continent to track Kuja down, and Vivi resolved to go with them. Having seen how he was now being treated on the Mist continent thanks to the actions of the Black Mage army, he sadly realised that there was no place for him there anymore. Upon venturing to the outer continent, Vivi was pleasantly surprised to see that the inhabitants weren't actually scared of him. In fact, they seemed quite endeared by his presence. This was primarily due to sentient Black Mages who lived nearby that often traded with the townspeople, but Vivi was unawares and started to become more and more confused as to why they talked to him as if they knew him. When he then encountered a Black Mage who had come to trade, things became much clearer. Despite the Black Mage running away, they learnt from Harold Pathknower that there was actually a settlement nearby, and that there were even quite a few Black Mages living there. This gave Vivi new direction and hope. His previous motivation had been to not only seek out Kuja, but to understand the relationship between him and the Black Mages, but it had also been to find a place where he wasn't feared and hated. This settlement therefore presented an amazing opportunity, as it meant that Vivi may finally get answers to questions that had been plaguing his mind for quite some time. When they reached the Black Mage village, Vivi was beyond excited. And even though the welcoming committee ran away in fear, screaming as if their life depended on it, they spoke. It was an affirmation to Vivi that showed that he wasn't alone. There were others like him, and they should be able to help him understand more about who and what he was. While there, Vivi learnt so much, especially from talking to Black Mage number 288, but it left Vivi with even more questions. It meant that Vivi's positive outlook was somewhat short-lived, as he learnt that mortality was a particular topic of concern within the village. While living in the village, Black Mage 288 had deduced much, but although he didn't feel comfortable sharing his thoughts with the rest of the village, he confided in Vivi. Many of the other Black Mages who had ventured to the village seeking a new way of life away from the dangerous humans had suddenly died without any warning, and while some of the Black Mages understood, others just could not comprehend what was happening. Based on this, number 288 had concluded that their lifespan must be quite limited, restricted to approximately 1 year. Vivi then started to become concerned about his own mortality. Would he suddenly stop functioning too? And when? And after talking in depth to number 288, he started to think about what made him happy, and with that in mind, Vivi gained something of a second wind. After he spoke to the other villagers, he decided not to stay with them. Instead, he wanted to try and be happy by experiencing new things that he would then share with the villagers when he came back. He knew that they would be unlikely to leave through fear, so he wanted to try and give them hope. With this new outlook, Vivi began to try and look at things in a whole new way. For example, when they ventured to Madain Sari, instead of skulking around as he had done previously, Vivi showed intrigue. He wanted to absorb as much as possible while he still could. But Vivi still couldn't stop his rather active mind, which had been sent into overdrive following the detailed conversations with number 288. He was obviously familiar with the concept of death, having seen his grandpa die, but also because he was present during some significant conflicts. It meant he'd seen some horrific things firsthand, but until now, he hadn't really understood what it actually meant to live and die. With this new knowledge, Vivi therefore started to ponder more abstract concepts such as where did people actually come from and what happened to them when they died. Seeing that Vivi was distressed, Zidane attempted to help, encouraging Vivi to try not to think too much. But although Vivi was polite, he just couldn't ignore the thoughts and feelings he was having, and decided to ponder further on the subject. Later that evening, Vivi was still troubled, even more so because he wasn't able to try and be carefree like Zidane had showed him. But after they shared a rather liberating experience together, Vivi began to understand a bit more about what it meant to just go with the flow. It meant that even though he didn't necessarily find an answer to what he was pondering, he decided to just move on with his life. He didn't want it to weigh him down. When Garnet then misspoke soon after, mentioning without thinking that Vivi looked like the mass-produced Black Mages, Vivi showed how much he had matured and developed in such a short period of time. He had come to terms with the fact that he was made, and because of this, he was able to start looking at things logically as opposed to emotionally. As they ventured further down inside the ether tree, which was thick with mist, he began to realise that there must be a connection between the Black Mages, Kuja, and the mist. When they then encountered the soul cage, they learnt the truth. Vivi had indeed been manufactured. Along with the other Black Mages, he was created as a result of Kuja's dark shaping of the mist. After revealing this, the soul cage then attempted to manipulate Vivi by making him aware that if they defeated him, no more Black Mages like Vivi could ever be created again. He had hoped to appeal to Vivi's softer side and insecurity, but instead, the plan backfired. Vivi was instead further motivated to defeat the soul cage. He didn't want any more instruments of mass destruction being made, even if it meant that he would essentially resign his race to extinction. But after the fight, he began to question whether he'd done the right thing. Would the other Black Mages hate him for dooming their race? Aiko, though, assured him that as long as he was true to himself, they would understand. They would never want him to lie to himself. When they then encountered Kuja at the ether tree, Vivi showed how much he had grown on the journey. No longer the timid little black mage who was afraid to act at the sight of danger, Vivi followed Garnet's lead and reprimanded Kuja for his role in the creation of the Black Mages, but also for turning everyone on the Mist Continent into instruments of war. All he got in response though was a grand dismissal by Kuja, who mocked him by simplifying the process he used to create the Black Mages. But before things could escalate any further in this particular parley, Queen Brahne arrived to try and achieve total domination. She was desperate to defeat Kuja and assert herself over Gaia, but Kuja turned the tables and used Brahne's own power against her. In the aftermath, Vivi reflected further on the thoughts of mortality that he'd been having earlier, as this time he pondered about how death affected those who were left behind, but also reflected on something that his grandpa had once said to him. After finding a fatally wounded Queen Brahne on the nearby beaches, Vivi felt that she may come to a stop at any moment. But even though he hated Brahne for her role in the creation of the Black Mages and the ensuing chaos that was seen across the Mist Continent, he couldn't help but feel sad about her passing. This was contrary to what Quan had told him when he was dying, that Vivi shouldn't be sad about death, but when he saw how much Garnet was affected by everything, it left a lasting impression on him and changed his entire perspective. With Brahne then perishing at the Battle of the Ether Tree, Kuja planned his next move, an attack on Alexandria. For this, he conscripted the help of the Black Mages that lived on the outer continent by convincing them that he could extend their lifespans. But it was at this point that Kuja's plan started to unravel. While his assault on Alexandria was underway, Garland appeared, causing Kuja to flee on Sid's stolen airship, which was manned by the Black Mages. When Vivi heard this news, he was shocked, stunned. He couldn't believe or even comprehend why his brothers from the village would be willing to work with such an evil, nefarious person such as Kuja, especially as they had sacrificed so much to try and avoid conflict. Vivi therefore returned to the Black Mage village to try and find answers. He wanted to understand more about why they would make this decision. But when he arrived, there was nobody there, except Black Mage number 288, whom he had previously shared a connection with, and two other Black Mages called number 33 and number 111. Like the other Black Mages who had gone with Kuja, they were scared of dying, but had chosen to stay behind so that they could help bring about some new life. It was something that Vivi used to show them that they weren't mere puppets, as when the egg that they were looking after cracked and a baby chocobo emerged, the Black Mages were elated. It proved that they were capable of emotion. They were sentient beings, they were not mere puppets. Seeing the logic behind Vivi's words, number 288 chose to then reveal the location of Kuja's secret palace, with the hope that Vivi would be able to rescue the other Black Mages from their plight. He also left Vivi with some words of encouragement saying, "I hope that we can be strong like you someday." The group eventually managed to corner Kuja when they went to Mount Gulag, and it was here that Vivi confronted his foe. But what he learnt left him feeling numb. Kuja had used the Black Mages. There was no secret that could be used to extend their lifespans, and when they learnt this, they didn't know what to do apart from apologize. And Vivi was left to try and pick up the pieces of their damaged hearts and minds. When they then returned to Lindblom to plan their next move, Vivi was adamant that he would never be able to forgive Kuja, not least because of the violent atrocities that had been committed due to his manipulations, but also because of how damaged he had left the Black Mages, his brothers. This time they tracked Kuja far and wide, and eventually ended up on another planet called Terra, which was inhabited by genomes. Even though they didn't look alike and everyone else couldn't get any kind of sensible response from them, Vivi felt a connection with the genomes. Due to his previous experience with the Black Mages that they'd met outside the village, he believed that they were quite similar and that he could communicate with them if given time. And following the destruction of Terra, Vivi therefore decided that the Black Mage village would be the perfect place to house the genomes that they were able to rescue. Black Mage number 288 also agreed that they were very similar in many ways, and he hoped that by spending time with the other Black Mages who had now returned to the village following Kuja's evil plot, that they may be able to open up over time and become part of society. With the genomes housed, Vivi then joined his comrades as they ventured into Memoria for a final showdown against Kuja. And while they were successful in this endeavour, Vivi's long-held fears about his mortality came true, as not long after their victory, he stopped functioning. Before he did though, Vivi was able to right some of the wrongs that he felt he had committed. Following his conversation with Black Mage number 288 on his initial village to the Black Mage village, He had been left to ponder reincarnation and legacy, but due to the destruction of the Soul Cage, he had been told that no more Black Mages could be created. He had resigned the race to extinction. But Vivi learnt that this was a false assertion. Before he stopped, he was able to create his own legacy in the form of many Black Mage sons. And he told his sons about Zidane and the strength that he had exhibited as they fought against terrible odds, and also that he had taught Vivi some of the most important lessons in life. And on the anniversary of their victory, Vivi's sons turned up in his place at the ceremonial showing of I Want to Be Your Canary. It proved to be the conclusion of a rather nice circular tale for our little hero. I feel as though even though Vivi was an incredibly young character, his growth throughout Final Fantasy IX was rather intense. He was created as a special individual with great powers and intellect, but he was still required to learn and develop. At the start of the game, Vivi is pushed over with ease and basically used as a doormat, but later in the game he's chasing down Kuja, demanding answers over the treatment of his brothers. And if you compare these actions, it's like night and day, but I'd say his development throughout the game is actually quite subtle. It takes time for Vivi to develop emotional responses to all of the different experiences that he encounters, but with the support of Zidane and his allies, he's able to comprehend these experiences and rationalize them. Vivi then develops and learns at an alarming rate, adapting his behavior in tandem with his growing maturity, and this allows him to make positive decisions, as he did after the destruction of Terra, that were about the betterment of other people's lives. And I think this decision in particular showed how intelligent Vivi had become by the end of the game. He saw something in the genomes that nobody else did, and despite the confines of his status within the group, which was in reality still quite low, he was able to propose a solution that allowed everyone to be happy. Well, except maybe Mikoto. It's what I feel makes Vivi a rather special character, but you may of course see things differently. Either way, with that small analysis out of the way, we're at the end of this Origins video. If you've made it this far, make sure you give yourself a customary pat on the back in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that like button, share this video around to all the people you know who love Final Fantasy IX, and why not also subscribe to our channel if you haven't done already. Also, be sure to let me know what you thought, and feel free to let us know what Vivi means to you as a character. Why not also consider supporting us on Patreon? You get the satisfaction of knowing that you're helping to support us in the creation of these videos, and you'll be rewarded by, amongst other things, getting your name at the end of videos like these guys. Alright everyone, thank you so much for joining me on another deep dive into the lore of Final Fantasy IX. This is Daryl, signing out. I will see you all next time for more Final Fantasy videos.